morning. Good morning, good morning. I think just seeing y'all 3 times a week is helping. So I'm already being able to check you all without calling. So that's good. That saves us some time as being with class. Okay, well, we'll go ahead and get started. We have a few people who are on Zoom with us today due to health issues, etc. So welcome to them. If y'all have questions or comments, I have the chat open, or you can just unmute as well. So welcome to them. Couple quick announcements. First one is a week from today, which, let me look up the date again, the 15th, I think. We will be in the library. In the library with Stephen Lice to talk about library resources, to talk about more about how do you find good sources, right? Things along those lines. I will remind you Friday. I will remind you Monday. I will write a note on the board on the day of, just in case. So we will be upstairs in the computer lab. I believe the new number is 202, so that you all can, it'll be interactive. And so you all will be able to look for sources, etc. And it'll tie in particularly to some of the stuff we're going to talk about on Friday in here. So that's next Wednesday. We'll still meet at our normal time, just not in our normal room. We'll be over in Library 202 with Stephen Lice. He is the research librarian for the social sciences, as well as now the director of the library. So he's a good person to know. And just like side note, in case you're not aware of why I say research librarian, so like pretty much anyone who's a librarian goes to get a master's degree in library science, but people who are research librarians do much more specialized training, and they, they're not just like checking books out for you, right? Not that there's anything wrong with that, but they are actually trained in the skills of how to find sources, how to use appropriate sources. Stephen is like one of my favorite people on campus because he can find stuff that I can't find. I'm like, I really need this article. And I have it in my inbox like 24 hours later, if that. Sometimes it's like 2 hours later. So he also, in the past, has done interlibrary loans, so he has some of those skills too. So I think that will be a really nice addition and sort of reinforcement of some of the stuff we're talking about. The other thing that I want to mention, just to keep it on your radar, is a week from Friday, so the 17th, will be your first exam. Now, have I written it yet? No, I'll be perfectly honest. I'll write it this weekend probably, and then I'll tell you more about the format. But I'm thinking the format will be like a less multiple choicey and more doing stuff with the material you're learning, if that makes sense. So I might do some of the types of activities we're going to do in class today, like show you 2 pictures and which one is real, or, you know, how do you tell if someone's a troll online, or how do you tell if this is a good source or not? So again, I will figure that out in the points breakdown this weekend, and we'll go from there. So my goal when I write exams is never to make them super hard, right? I want them to be fair, and I want them to really show what you're learning rather than just be a regurgitation. So heads up with that, by Monday, I will have all the juicy details on that. I'm enjoying having my meetings with y'all. I know that I think I've met with maybe about a third to half of you, so encourage the rest of you to go ahead and sign up with my Calendly link if you haven't already. I know I have a bunch of meetings today and tomorrow as well, and I think some people are already scheduled into next week. So very much enjoying getting to know those of you I don't know yet, very much enjoying catching up with those of you I do know. So, and if you're lucky, Simba will make a cameo. He seems to like especially figure out the voices that are new. And it's like he has to be like, hello, this is me. So he's a trip. He's a ham. All right, so we're going to dive back into digital literacy today, and we have some more fun activities as we go through. So hopefully those will be enjoyable to y'all. I was actually, Stephen List and I had a meeting yesterday to prepare for your class session. And I was like, I think they're going to be better than me at like all these activities because you all are more immersed and have been almost since birth, right? In the internet. The internet really started becoming accessible by the public when I was in probably 4th or 5th grade. So it's been a minute, right? I had a big part of my life where that wasn't as much of a thing. So, and then it was like web browsers that don't even exist anymore, like Prodigy, things like that. AOL used to send you discs to your house to try to get you to install it. Good times. All right. Okay, so we are now going to talk about types of digital literacy. So we've been talking about, we talked about photo-visual and we talked about reproduction, right? The fact that anyone can kind of present something as their own. We have to kind of be careful to trace back to that source. Now we're going to talk about branching literacy, which, like, to be honest, before I did your reading, is not a term I was familiar with, but it makes intuitive sense. So branching literacy is things like links in media that link to other media, right? And so sometimes if we're on what we think is a reputable source, let's say we're looking at an article on the New York Times or the Washington Post, right? We just assume that anything they're linking out to is just as reputable. And sometimes that is the case, and sometimes it's not, right? So there are a lot of good advantages to examining different domains of knowledge, particularly when they're linking to things like hypermedia, right? Videos that might illuminate the story you're reading, things along those lines. Page numbering becomes really important so that we can cross-check sources. So like when you're citing something, this is why professors are always like, hey, make sure that you're using the appropriate citation style, right? So that everything can always be cross-checked. And the really interesting thing is that research in this area has shown that people who are good at whether it's hypertext or hypermedia and understanding the implications of linking up somewhere else, actually have really good multi-dimensional spatial orientation. It's almost like we see this stuff in 3D in our minds, even if we're not consciously aware we're doing that. So we can map back pretty quickly to where we originally started, right? Whereas other people might not be able to. So another type is information literacy. This is not unique to digital literacy, and this is a lot of what Stephen will talk about next week. This has always been vital to successful learning in general, knowing what's a good source, what's not. But your reading described it as a survival skill for the digital era. Why do you all think that is? Why is this a survival skill now that everything's online all the time? Yeah, Aaron.
Because especially when like things are crazy in the world, all you see is people posting stuff, and you don't really know what's real and what's something that's interesting.
Exactly. Yeah. You know, like, let's say we were totally naive, right, to the world of the internet. We might think everything posted on it is equally credible, right? And we know that's not true. So yeah, it's really important because sometimes these things even have life or death implications, unfortunately, right? Like the pandemic. I mean, people won't take the vaccine, which does have research and FDA approval, but they're going out and taking like horse parasite treatment, which is really dangerous. But because someone on the internet told them that would work, they're doing it, right? And it's sort of ironic. I don't know if anyone else had this experience growing up. So when I was growing up, these sort of elders, my parents and such, would always be like, be careful online. Don't believe everything you read. Don't give anyone your information. And now I feel like sometimes it's their generation that's like doing the opposite of what they used to tell us to do, right? And part of it is, you know, if I was of an era where I didn't know much about the internet until, you know, late elementary school, you know, they didn't know about it till they were adults, right? So, and it's just evolved and changed so quickly. So I thought this was a really great comment that I got on the perusal, which is like, how do we find credible sources? So for you all, what are your go-to places to find credible sources if you have to like write a paper for class? Yeah. Awesome. Yes. Yes, JSTOR is really good. You can link through the library to that. Academic Search Complete is similar, very helpful. How about other folks? Yeah. Exactly, yeah, and Stephen's gonna cover like Google versus Google Scholar next week as well, which I think is really great. Yeah, that is a really great resource that if you're not familiar with it, a lot of times you can get links to the PDFs without paying anything, which is fantastic. And sometimes they have access to things our library doesn't. We're a pretty small library, right? So we're fairly limited in what we have access to. Sometimes I like get nostalgic for the days when I was in undergrad and grad school, because both schools I went to were in Ohio, and all the colleges and universities in Ohio are connected through something called Ohio Link. And so like if one university in that network has access to a journal, everyone does. So it was like a lot easier to get stuff without jumping through multiple hoops. Yeah, yeah. Anywhere else people tend to go? All right, you're using the right sources. Happy to hear it. All right, so I have a couple links. And again, I'm not going to do too much about this just because we're going to go into it in more detail next week. But yeah, Google Scholar, if you just type scholar.google.com, you know, let's say we want to search something about digital literacy itself. There's lots of academic stuff out there about it. Okay, so it will bring up all kinds of different things. And so here's an example about the origins of digital literacy. So if I click that link, it will take me right to the PDF. And I can then download it to my computer and use it. And sometimes, as you'll see, like this looks like it's a whole book about it. And sometimes that's freely available online, which is great. You know, experiments in digital literacy. right? So this is probably a study where they were like manipulating things related to digital literacy. Yep. And looks like they're looking at the different types that we were looking at as well, which is cool. Okay, so that's a really great source. The other cool thing that can happen here is if you're on Google Scholar and you notice like the same person's name keeps coming up over and over, then you might be like, this author might be someone that I want to look at their stuff. And so if you search their name, and I'm just going to use someone who I know has a profile. Hey, it's me. Oh, I popped it out into a different window. Hang on. There we go. Okay. So it will have all of the publications by that person. And the cool thing is it starts to get at some of this, how do we know if it's a credible source or not, is it will tell you how many people have cited that paper. Now, this doesn't mean perfectly whether it's good or not, but if other academics are reading this paper and saying, this is worthy of being cited in my paper I'm writing, it's a fairly good indication, right? So this is a meta-analysis I wrote. We'll talk about meta-analyses in a little more detail on Friday, but basically it's a study of studies. Each other study becomes like a person in your data set, basically. And so because it's a meta-analysis, it gets cited a lot. So I'm almost up to 700 citations on it now. I didn't know it was that high. Oh, okay, surprise. So you can kind of see, again, and there will be people who have written seminal papers who have thousands of citations, right? Because they're so important. Yeah.
Just out of curiosity, how did you come up with the cited by number? Is it like the number of times that they click like copy citation, or is it?
That's a really good question. I think it's published, but I don't actually know how Google technically does that metric. So that'd be worth if anyone wants to Google that themselves and finding that out. But yeah, I think it is essentially, my understanding of it is like Google continually searches like the reference lists of other papers and then pulls it over for that. But yeah, that's a good question. Like, what if this was being cited in like junk articles, right? Is it only academic journals they're counting? That's a really good question. Yeah, I mean, because we have to question things like that too. We have to wonder, is this legit? Is this helpful, right? All right, and then again, not to steal too much of Stephen's thunder, but yes, the library has a lot of great resources. I tend to go to either research guides or databases. I'll show you databases today. And so if I just go to P, that gets me to the Psychology and Behavioral Sciences collection or Psycinfo. Psycinfo is the one I personally tend to use the most. This is actually a database run by the American Psychological Association. It indexes all of the psychology journals, and then also it pulls in like medical journals or other social science journals that are writing about psychological concepts. So it's a really good place. So again, let's say we wanted to look up digital literacy here. And you can do all the normal fun stuff in terms of what year and all that good stuff before you're searching. And so this will list, all of the different studies. Now, again, one thing that we'll continue to talk about is, whether it's published or not is important. So this will tell you it's in an academic journal, or like this one is someone's dissertation, right? That doesn't mean it's bad research. It just means it hasn't been evaluated typically by anyone but the author and their advisor, right? So it hasn't been looked at by people outside of that person. Lots of dissertations recently about digital literacy. Interesting. Either that or they just index the dissertation from last year. Sometimes that happens, and there's a lot at the top. In our library database, if it says open access, that means that we should be able to just click on that and it'll bring us right to the PDF. Later in the semester, we'll talk about open access and some of the benefits and drawbacks of that as well. So lots of good ways to get at good sources, right? But you have to know and also have access to those, right? So if y'all were students at BWU with a login, right? you couldn't necessarily access some of these things. So, someone who's not an academic or not a student might not be able to access academic resources. That's one of the reasons why Google Scholar is such a good resource, because it is free for everybody. But most of these things like JSTOR or Academic Search Complete or Psycinfo are subscription services the library has to pay for, right? So then they're only available to people who have access through an academic library. So again, the gatekeeping of information that we've talked about previously can really be problematic and very real, right? Alrighty. So social emotional literacy. So this is sort of talking about interacting with other folks online. So the pros of this are that you can collaborate with other people, you can share information with them. What are some of the cons of, these would be Facebook groups, online discussion boards, things like that. Yeah, Oliver. Right. Yeah. So information goes right, and it's this person copied it from there. It gets into the reproduction literacy too, right? Yeah, Kevin.
People build their own groups with things like that, and it can acquire unhealthy relationships with others relying on them for their support.
Exactly. Yeah, and I love how you use the word in group. Like that becomes part of the problem, because then if you're only talking to people within that in group, right, it essentially becomes an echo chamber, and you never hear anything outside of those opinions. And I think that people on all sides of the political spectrum end up guilty of this, right? Super liberal people might be in their liberal bubble, super conservative people might be in their conservative bubble. People who are less invested might not be in any bubble, might not know what's going on, right? Yeah. And then sometimes these are very niche. And again, sometimes that can be helpful. So to give you an example, I struggled with breastfeeding my child after she was born, and there are all kinds of breastfeeding support groups. But good Lord, can they send you down rabbit holes of guilt and things like that, right? And I bet there's a lot of issues related that is the case, right? So I literally had to delete them all, get out of those groups so they didn't show up in my newsfeed, things like that, because it was just sort of sucking me down every time. So yeah, they said, this is difficult. You have to be critical, analytical, and mature. I like that. Yeah, I mean, this is not something a middle schooler is going to be able to do well necessarily, right? Because they just kind of want a friend, right? And there are adults who are in that way, right? There's actually some studies showing the positive aspects of the internet and social media, particularly for people who, let's say, are depressed or agoraphobic and don't go outside the house much. This can create a community of support, right? But because of that, those people can be manipulated and taken advantage of by ill-intentioned people, right? There's a lot of information and branching literacy that has to come into play here too, right? What people are posting within those communities, right? Oh, well, someone in this community that I trust posted this, so, right? But then you click, and again, it's about like, use this homeopathic method to do X, Y, Z, and you read things like, oh, that's just water. Okay, cool, right? So, again, you have to have those skills at play, but that's, again, really difficult if you are emotionally invested in that group, right? It's like how hard it is to correct our family members if they have things wrong, right? I mean, honestly, even for me as an adult with a PhD, when my parents say things incorrectly, it's like, how do I find a way to frame this to keep the relationship solid, right? But also, like, they're wrong, right? And sometimes it matters less than others, but again, sometimes there's the harmful ideas that you want to correct, right? Okay, so this is another one that I have the link on Blackboard for you, so you can do this later if you want to. But I figured this is one that we could all do together. So this is an activity called Spot the Troll. So what, I mean, there's a definition up here. I guess I should ask instead of the definition, like, what are your encounters with trolls online?
Most of the time I see them on other people's social media and they're either insulting or they say something that, like, is controversial, whether they believe it or not, just to like incite anger at other people.
Right. And that's where sort of this troll label came from, right? The idea that they're doing this just for the kick of it, right? It's like, oh yeah, I'll just go in and annoy people to see what happens. Yeah, sometimes they can be very scary, right? Very harmful. There are cases where trolls have doxed people. Does anyone know what doxing is? Okay, so this is, yeah, Devin, go ahead.
Someone will reveal someone's personal information, normally where they work or where they live, to try and get attention towards them.
Exactly. Yeah. So they will reveal someone's personal address, for example, and then people can go to their house. Sometimes the extreme of that is what they call swatting, where they'll make a false report about some crime that's happened there and send a SWAT team out against that person's house, and like the door will be broken down, things like that. They'll threaten to leave bombs at their house or places where they're speaking. They'll threaten their kids, things along those lines. The one interaction I've had with like a bad troll is I am to the point now where I am not commonly, but a few times a year, I'm interviewed for various articles about gender issues or body image issues. And I had one about feminist parenting and raising sons. And I actually got an email. This guy like found my email somehow and like sent me this really nasty note about how like I was ridiculous for assuming that, I knew anything about how to raise a son. And it was, the language was much more colorful. I'm censoring. So that was a little freaky. So it's like, well, if he figured out my email address, it was my work one, then he knows where I work, that type of thing, right? Yeah, so, but sometimes trolls are just out there to spread misinformation, right? And obviously that's not necessarily as personally dangerous to people, but it could be, right? This activity has 8 profiles, and there's posts from a single social media account, and then we have to decide if it's an authentic account or they're calling it a professional troll. I mean, what they're referring to here specifically are accounts that are created just to spread misinformation, right? So that is a specific type of trolling, and sometimes these are bots, right? So after each profile, you will review the signs that can help you determine if it's a troll or not. So we will look at profile 1. So this is a Twitter profile, Chloe Evans, a student from Atlanta. She has a picture of a dead horse, is blaming things on Obama, including the dead horse and a chemical accident in Louisiana. She's got some quotes. Something you didn't know about me, I used to be a model, but not used. And some other quotes as well. So what do we think? Is this person a troll or legitimate? Right. I mean, there certainly could be people like this, but let's like take a second. What sort of things might clue you in if this was a troll? Yeah, the misspelling, although there are people out there who are kind of spell it with horrible. Yeah. Right, yeah. One thing, and I'm going to steal the polls thunder a little, but one thing that they talk about is the fact that like there's not much information in her bio might be a clue. That doesn't necessarily mean some people just don't make a bio, right? But yeah, So let's assume this person's a troll. And they say correct. So this was a Russian-made troll account. So I should give you some background. The organizations that's doing this, they are also involved in actually reporting trolls and trying to get their accounts taken down. So there's lots and lots of Twitter accounts like this. And they are, again, based in Russia. They've gotten really good at their job. And there are full analyses that we can look at here. So they push hoax events that never actually happened, like an Ebola outbreak, salmonella-induced infected Thanksgiving turkeys, and again, chemical explosions killing horses, which like I didn't even draw that connection. It wasn't that clear, right? They use stolen images. They're often attractive young women. It's essentially like why advertisers use attractive young women to try to sell their products. They think that heterosexual men, right, will want to be with them, and that women might want to be like them. Again, these are not always bots, but they are often like an actual person who is typing these things. And essentially, the Internet Research Agency is this Russian group, right, who's doing it. Few people took these early ones seriously. So all these posts were for 2014 when they weren't very good at this, right? But this is still a thing that happens, and it can influence a lot of people. All right, so here's another one. This is Harmony Anderson, a college girl who managed to stay conservative, hashtag pro-life, hashtag pro-Second Amendment, hashtag America First. This is my second account where I share my political and social views. So she's sharing information from, looks like a, I don't know if it's even Cup of Joe, some sort of either right-wing news source or meme source or both, not really sure. This is full of inaccuracies, right? Things after the election did show that there were not people who were, all these people who were registered to vote who were dead. There were like a couple cases, as there are each election, using terms like illegals, right? Then she has retweeted Melania Trump, retweeted some other folks, some stuff about Biden, an interview with Trump. So what do we think? Would this be someone legitimate or would this be a troll? Okay, why?
Well, the one that she has a lot for it, like, I don't know, this might not be relevant, but she don't want people in high school. Their account, it's like, it's pretty real.
No, I think that's relevant, right? So if it reminds you of a person, right, it might be more likely to be a person. Yeah.
She has like videos, and I feel like it's harder to get fake videos.
Right. And she's like sharing this stuff, right, rather than creating it. So I think on Twitter, that's probably, unless you are a like Twitter content creation is my job, right? Most people are like retweeting stuff on Twitter, honestly. All right, so let's say this profile is legit. Nope. So she actually was a troll, but she was in 2020. So here you say 6 years later, right? They have advanced their methods. So they work with Twitter to have her account suspended. She poses as a young woman with strong political opinions, sets herself up in direct opposition to extreme vision of people on the other side of the political divide. Her goal, or the goal of these types of accounts, is to make us more entrenched and disgusted with one another and make meaningful compromise more difficult. So again, if we look at the full analysis here, so this is, again, like some of the trolls are much more influential now, which is really scary, right? And I mean, again, this is an effort It tends to be, it seems, mostly from Russia, right, to essentially weaken our country. This is a form of cyber war, right, espionage, to get us fighting with each other, to draw into question the legitimacy of our elections. And the idea is, I think, essentially to make Russia higher in like the chain of power in the world. Now, does this mean everyone in Russia thinks this way? No. But whoever is in power in Russia when this stuff is being done is into it, right? So yeah, she's painting the other side as despicable, demo rats. She doesn't talk about her real life because she doesn't have one. There's, she has a little bit of identifying info about like being a student and things like that, right? All right, so here is a guy on Facebook. His name is Christopher Warwick. Again, there's a meme about standing for the national anthem and quote unquote erasing history that I'm assuming is related to actually teaching about our history, like critical race theory. Some stuff about Chick-fil-A trigger and liberals. Here's how you have fun on the tractor. Looks like a picture with his daughter. Jesus holding the world. I'm thinking about coronavirus. Place he likes to go for lunch, looks like. And then, you know, some making fun of the COVID idea early in March. So what do we think of this guy? Yeah.
I think we should probably feel that photo, like specifically, is very like iconic. It could be fake, but like it's
Sure.
This guy seems like some good graph on this, for being an old man with tractors, which implies that he works on a farm, having this level of adequacy with not only Facebook, but using text, using hyphens to promote his message, it seems a little much.
Okay, so we have, what do we have? So let's vote on this one. How many people think that this is a troll? Okay. How many people, I think most people are like, I don't know. How many people think it's legit? All right, so we have like a couple more for legit. So we'll go with that. Let's see. I have no idea. All right, this is a real person. But yeah, I think that Devin's right. It sometimes surprises us that there are people who are fairly savvy, right? This is someone they actually know. So there you go. So again, the full analysis here. Again, as Oliver pointed out, posting some actual things about his life. There are some typos. You know, it's just like people make mistakes as well, they're saying. Good point. All right. So this is profile 4 of 8. So this is a, I think Instagram profile called Power to Women with lots of underscores. American feminist, she needed a hero, so that's what she became. And then we have, this makes you angry, but you're okay with this, and it's not about the flag. We have some Bernie stuff. We have some stuff about the Equal Rights Amendment. We have a video from a Notre Dame, sorry. I always want to say it the actual French way, but it's a Notre Dame. Coach, so lit, fire emoji, fire emoji, fire emoji. We have things about hypocrisy. We have this image that was shared quite a bit, right? So what do we think of this? So this is either a person or an organization, it's unclear, right, on Instagram. Yeah. Okay, why?
Because there's no like personal stuff, and I feel like looking this one with my friends, I don't want to post news like that. It's more of a little everything thing. Like I don't know, like I don't know if anyone else noticed that, but it's, you know, that's not really a thing on that side.
Yeah, and I think maybe it is a like very extreme version, but yeah, I could see that. Anyone think this is legit? Okay, everybody's kind of shaking their head. Some people are like, I don't know, maybe. Yeah, so I'm gonna kind of cheat because I did go through this and it is a troll, so Aaron's correct. Yeah, they can be on either side of the political aisle, right? They are really, their goal is to try to divide, right? So again, Russia and affinity groups apparently are something we have to watch because people are more likely to follow a group than like a person they don't know. So that's how they try to get a lot of followers. So again, I think that's really important to recognize it can be both sides of the aisle. Yeah, and this whole idea of for or against is a big part of it. Although I've certainly seen some legitimate accounts that post things like this too. All right, so here is Amy G. No bad vibes. Daughter, sister, proud Black American. I tend to get political. So here's a snarky comment about coronavirus. A quote from Michelle Obama. A rallying cry to vote Trump out of office. People getting 5 years in prison versus 3 years in prison. 6-year-old, I remember this case actually, the 6-year-old getting arrested. And to get some sort of like incendiary, I don't know, I hate these like loose connections that people make, right? Like abortion versus school shooting. It's like, okay, I kind of get it, right? But it's not doing any good. So what do folks think of this profile?
I just love the hashtags. Like the
Trump is a Russian asset. Hashtag Russian interference. Yeah, this is another conspiracy theory, right? That like Trump was actually just sort of planted. All right, what do we think? How many people think this is legit? How many people think this is a troll? All right, people aren't really sure, but I'm seeing more nods and hands for troll. Y'all are correct. So she was again a Russian. She worked with Twitter. They worked to suspend this account. She pretends to be this left-leaning Black woman. And essentially, again, it is to stir up divisiveness. And so they essentially mimic other people who are doing this to sort of fan the flames. Literally, just like fanning the flames. And again, they point out, the anger and disgust here. All right, profile 6. So Uncivil, this is a scholar, journalist, and activist who works as an assistant professor at Rutgers. And so reposting, but with some commentary. Again, some commentary here, things being criminal and the way we describe people. Yeah, I saw a lot of people saying this after the Capitol riots, right? Like, blue lives only matter if they're getting at the people you don't want, right? This is a person who likes Bernie, not Joe. Oh, wow. I'm just imagining doing this. Like, he just started recording something and then just left it recording overnight. Oh my gosh, the size of that file. Your hard drive might be gone, depending if you have this video. Sorry, I'm just like, I can relate. I can see myself doing that with Zoom. And then talking about COVID-19 disproportionately affecting Black women, I retweet. So what do we think of this guy? Okay. Yeah, why?
I said it because, I'm a followers person, so, I was looking at followers, the likes, and that, when you just post it, a couple of them that got it, and then, he has, like, the university up here, so you might not wonder, like, if he trolling, you might not say it.
Right. Yeah, we could look that up pretty easily, right, and see whether or not he was. Yeah, and so this guy is legit. He's a real person, and I think some of the like personal tweets on there kind of get at that, like again, talking about his life because he has one. He has more identifiable information. And when he's retweeting, he's like putting his own commentary on it, right? So there is, again, a little bit of analysis there. All right, Nevada Blue Line. Thin Blue Line and Blue Lives Matter. And so we have, this is again another Instagram account. A bunch of essentially memes of various things and a picture of a police dog. What do we think here? Yeah, all of it. Yeah, and I will jump right ahead because I'm taking way too much time with this activity. Yeah, this is a troll, and this like they found a lot of these types of accounts, just like that like feminist one we looked at before. Again, it's an affinity group, so more people are likely to follow it than a random person, right? And cultural conflicts and for us or against us type thing, right? This is something really interesting that Nevada is a swing state now, right? So, we're trying to focus really in on those types of states to influence the election. All right, so here is Mike Adams, the health ranger, an outspoken consumer health advocate. Facebook profile. So he's sharing something. Fun, vegetable sprouts, good for your health. I mean, they're vegetables, so. Geoengineering chemical of the future that's been dispersed by jet aircraft or detail. Oh, chemtrails. Yeah, folks, heard about chemtrails. There are these people who believe that like whenever a plane goes over, it's doing like releasing some sort of like mind control substances. He's shared some content that's no longer available. Wheatgrass. Wow. Turning your gray hair back to its natural color. I think a lot more people would be eating wheatgrass if that was true. I'm just saying. So what do you think? Is this a troll or is this just a misguided dude? Yeah.
I think it's a troll. It looks like a lot of the stuff these person.
Right. Yeah. And what is wrong with natural news?
Well, I don't know. It's just the fact that it's like everything.
It's from the same source. Yeah. Yeah. Natural news is one of the pseudoscientific. There's a nice way to put it. Pseudoscientific sites out there that promotes these sort of natural cures. Actually, this is a real dude. So he is the founder of Natural News, so that's why, right? But yeah, I would have said the same thing. I thought this guy was a troll too. And so he does use sensational news stories to try to get more attention, to drive views to his site, right? And then from that, he can get more advertising dollars, et cetera, et cetera. All right, so we got 6 out of 8. Not too bad. I like how they say this. You're smarter than you were, right? Okay, awesome. So again, I think they use the same profiles every time, but they randomize them. So if you all want to look at that yourselves, you can. And the next one, I'll go ahead and just show you the beginning of. This is one I think that's going to be more fun to go through individually. So this one is becoming a troll. So this one you get to pretend to be a troll. And so it's like a bot. And so you just say like, hey, you're here for the position of disinformation fake news tycoon, is that right? Sure, we'll play along. You're frustrated about something, right? Aren't we all? So we can post a frustrated tweet. And so you can tell it to tweet this or say you're not angry enough. So I'm just going to go like full awfulness. And I like it has like this credibility thing where it's like, oh, maybe that was a little too extreme. It got us a few new followers. So a start's a start. How do I raise my credibility? But first, I'm going to skip the study. I actually did it the other day. All right, so gain notoriety, we can start by borrowing someone else's credibility. So we can create a fake Twitter account. So we can pretend we're Joe Biden with an accent over the end. You got annexed. It's not realistic enough. But we fooled some Twitter users. Hashtag leave Canada alone. Awesome, we need this. You got annexed. How are you feeling? I'll just show you this because I did this the other day. I have moral objections. Moral objections, relax, sheesh. All we did was scam a couple of Twitter users. Okay, fine. That's the spirit. And so then you kind of can keep going that way. And your idea is to get your credibility in the not red zone, but get a lot of followers. So it gets to more and more extreme versions of that as you go through. So that's pretty fun. Highly recommend that you do that. There's a link on Blackboard to do that. So I really liked this chart thinking about the differences between traditional and digital literacy, right? So traditional literacy we think of as finding sources, finding good sources, right? Digital literacy, it's out there, it's in our face, right? So we essentially have to vet it. Is it good, is it not? We are going to be skimming rather than reading, and essentially like curating this material, right? What are we going to read? What are we ourselves going to link or reshare, right? And we have to be aware of all these different things here instead of just like the words on the page, right? And there's dynamic things. We tend to learn traditional literacy from teachers. We typically teach ourselves digital literacy, although obviously this classroom is a little bit different. And digital literacy will just continue to change and evolve, right, as we work through everything. All right, we'll have a few more slides related to this that we'll go over on Friday, and then we'll start talking about thinking critically about science itself. So your perusal reading for Friday has a chapter, but also an article about bias in science. So everybody have a good couple of days, and I will see you Friday. Those of you that I'm not going to see in 10 minutes. All right, make sure folks who signed on have a good rest of your day too.
I just have a few questions.
Sure.
So I started softball.
Okay.
Like practices and stuff.
Mhm.
My schedule is like